Is there a way out? Can I change my brain? Am I just a victim to who I am? I'm your host, Steve Sisler. Stay tuned for another episode of Behavioral Insights.
Welcome to the Behavioral Insights podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about authoritarian ethics. What does that look like? It's really good to know because we're experiencing it in our country right now. Coming up, Behavioral Insights with your host, Steve Sisler. Welcome back, folks. It's really good to be with you today as we talk about ethics. I'm going to be talking about authoritarian ethics versus humanistic ethics, or what I like to call humanitarian ethics. But I first want to give you the difference between the two. In authoritarian ethics, an authority, not you yourself, but an authority over you, states what is good for you and then lays down the laws and norms for your conduct in the world. Humanistic ethics means we ourselves create the norms, and we ourselves become subject to those norms that we created. So nobody is, quote, lording it over us when it comes to how to behave in the world. We are doing that for ourselves. Now, the problem with talking about this arises when we're confronted with the alternative of having a dictatorial, irrational authority, and then what some people perceive as having no authority at all. So I don't want you to get the idea that humanitarian ethics means we're running around crazy, raping and killing people. That's stupid. And a lot of people go there instantly. And the people that typically go there are the ones that operate under an authoritarian ethic. So I want to make myself clear at the outset here that humanitarian ethics or humanistic ethics does not mean we are some crazy law unto ourselves, but we act lawlessly. That's a fallacious concept, and I don't want you thinking that. I was in the church for 50 years. I've been out of the church 7 years. And it was hard for a lot of people that know me to imagine the fact that I'm not out, acting like a crazy person now that I'm out from underneath, quote, the authority of God, end quote. When I was questioning a lot of the theology, some of the people I would talk with, I said, well, I just don't believe that, fill in the blank about whatever doctrine that was. But I would say, I don't believe that. And what would I get from then? Well, if that's not true, I'm just going to go rob a bank. That's what somebody said to me. If that's not true, then I'm just going to go rob a bank. I said, well, you might as well go rob it now because you already have. And the only thing keeping you from robbing the bank is this authority figure that you've got over you that's got you scared shitless that if you make a mistake, you're going to burn in hell forever. So you're probably pretty bummed out that you can't rob a bank. Now, I've been out of the church for 7 years. I haven't robbed one bank. I haven't really changed at all. I'm the same person I've always been, but that is not true for everyone. And the people that it's not true for, they have a hard time imagining that anybody could act that way. Now, when we speak of authority, I want you to ask yourself this question. Are we talking about rational or irrational authority, because Fromm talks about this to a great extent, the difference between rational and irrational authority. Let's look at rational authority and what that means. So rational authority has its source in personal competence. All right. Now, I talk about this a lot when I'm consulting clients, especially management in the workplace. Some people have title authority and some people have functional authority. And there's a difference, a really big difference between the two. So what is title authority? It means you're in charge because somebody said you were. It doesn't mean you're good at what you do, per se. It means you're the boss, all right? Now, functional authority is different than title authority. In functional authority, you have authority because you're good at something. If I'm really good at changing brakes on the car, then when it comes to changing the brakes, and I'm helping somebody change brakes, they've never done it before, I'm going to be the authority when it comes to how to change those brakes the right way so that you don't end up killed after you get them installed. If I just had title authority, chief brake person, but I did not know how to install brakes, then I don't have any authority when it comes to telling you how to do anything. And that's how this functions. So rational authority has its source in competence. So the person whose authority is respected functions competently in a role. They function competently at a task when they are entrusted with a task by anything or anyone. So whoever's conferring a task upon you at work, let's say, and you function really well in that task, then you have authority in that area. Otherwise, you don't. Authority is a product of competence. It's not just conferred on someone for no other reason than I want to give you a title. So it's very important that you check your own standing in the world to see where your authority is coming from. Is your authority coming from the fact that you're extremely competent in what you do and that's why you're an authority in your subject matter? Or did you assign yourself an authoritative role simply because you wanted to be in charge of something? Now, the proof is always in the pudding, my friends. And it's not hard to distinguish as to whether or not you are a real authority when it comes to what you do. So we talk about thought leaders in the world. Well, a lot of thought leaders memorize some stuff, read a few books, build a website, and go into the world and call themselves a thought leader. But that's not what a thought leader is. A thought leader is somebody who's competent in a subject matter, understands the subject matter, doesn't need notes when they talk, and knows what they're talking about. They have people's best interests at heart, they're messengers of goodwill, and they're smart. And they are very competent in their subject matter. And that's what gives you rational authority. People that operate out of irrational authority, they have to resort to intimidation and power over rather than power to. People that have and operate out of rational authority, they empower the people they work with. People that function out of irrational authority have power over people. And so those people are not free to learn and grow in an organization because the authority never allows them to go out and learn their trade or learn their function. So poor managers don't help you become better at what you do. They just control you. They're terrible managers. And all they do is control outcomes. So they're in a role to direct and control or to agree or disagree, but they're never in the role to help you understand you and be better at what you do. And so they have to resort to intimidation. We see this in religion. And so this is really important to understand. In religion, there's an intimidation or a need need to arouse people's admiration by magical qualities, okay? And all religions do this. When they get their authority from a selected deity, then the deity's magical qualities is designed to arouse and stir admiration and awe. Admiration and awe. So, as long as your authority is being used to competently help instead of exploiting people, then your authority is based on rational grounds, and it doesn't call for this irrational awe and inspirational intrigue just to get people to listen to you. All right, so on the side of irrational authority, the power over people can be either physical or mental. It can be realistic or only relative in terms of the anxiety and the helplessness the other person submitting to the authority feels. Now, this is important to understand. Power on the one side, fear on the other. And that is how a lot of authorities work in this world. They're always the buttresses on which irrational authority is built. Fear on one side, submission on the, coming out of that fear, and power over people on the other side, holding them to the fire through submissive actions. Now, I write about this in my book, What Moves Us, an integrated look at human motivation. There's a section on power in that book, and it'd be good for you to buy that and read it. I talk about power to versus power over. And it's really important that this is understood. And so irrational, to sum this up, is power over people. And rational authority is power to people. And so it's really important that you understand that. So what we see going on in the country right now is a lot of power over. You submit or else, right? You submit to me or else. Now, does that mean they are competent in what they're calling for people to do? Are they competent business people? Are they competent doctors? Are they competent? And I'm speaking of a lot of these governors in the United States right now, taking it upon themselves to be specialists in medicine, to be specialists in business. A lot of their thinking is completely irrational. Okay, you're allowed to go to Walmart, you're allowed to go to Target, but you can't go to church. You can't go to a gym. Okay? That's irrational. And it's a sign that the authority is in title, not in competence. You got to hear this, folks. A lot of these governors, their power is not stemming from competence. Their authority is not stemming from competence. It's irrational and insane. It's stemming from title power. Their ethical framework is a framework of authoritarian ethics. And part of authoritarian ethics is a preconceived idea that the people under their authority are incompetent in and of themselves. All right? Irrational authority sees those who submit to that authority as incompetent people in need of the authority in order to be ethically sound in the world. In other words, a lot of these governors in certain states, I'll just pick New York for one, view the large body of people in their state as incompetent buffoons, and without their brain power and their authoritative decisions and their so-called rational thinking, people would be unable to live a productive life. So they have to step in like a god and dictate to the lesser through power over how you need to live. And if you don't do it, I'm sending you to hell, which is outrageous fines, imprisonment, jail, whatever you want to call it. And so this is what we see taking place. And it's really, really disturbing. Okay, what else? All right, rational authority is based on the equality of both authority and subject, which differ only with respect to the degree of knowledge or skill in a particular field. All right? It's important that you understand this. Rational authority is an equal time authority. It doesn't say that I have more value than you have simply because you're underneath me. We are equal in value, although I may be more competent in a specific field of interest. So I have authority based upon my knowledge and my competence, but I don't have authority because you're lesser than me as an individual. And this is real important. Inequality, by its very nature, is implying a difference in value. In other words, I am more valuable than you because I am more competent. You are more valuable in regards to a specific field of interest and your capacity for doing something well within that field, but you don't have a greater value than I have as a human being. And this is where problems come up in this authoritarian ethics, because irrational authority is following the current use of the word authoritarian, let's say, as synonymous with totalitarianism and anti-democratic notions. So when we become anti-democratic, we say that this group of people is lesser than me because I have power over them. And they are under, I am over, and I write about this in my behavior book, and I call it the verticality ethic. So think of people on a vertical line. And so the verticality ethic is based upon the idea that God, a deity, is way up here, and then below the deity there's these angels here, and then there's man down here, and then below man are animals down here, and then below animals are demons down here, and then below the demons down here, way down in hell, is a devil. Okay, so that's basically a verticality ethic. And so this is the way authoritarian leaders think. They think in terms of more and less based upon high and low valuations. Okay, what else? Authoritarian ethics can be distinguished from humanistic or humanitarian ethics by two criteria. One of these is formal and the other is material. All right, let's talk about formally. Formally, authoritarian ethics denies man's capacity to know what is good or bad for himself. All right, this is Fromm's big argument here. There are certain authorities that deny your capacity to know right and wrong in yourself. And if you've ever read Paul Bloom's book, Dr. Paul Bloom from Yale, Just Babies, The Origins of Good and Evil, I think it is. It's super powerful because babies, within just a few months old, they already know right and wrong. No one's teaching them any of this. It's built in. They know it. And so this idea that you can't know good and bad in yourself and have to be taught it, or you can't understand good and bad and have to be, brought into some religious organization in order to be straightened out, is a real problem. And so these types of systems they're not based on reason and knowledge. They're only based on magic, awe, and authority. They're based on the subject's feelings of weakness and dependence upon that authority. It's this. The subjects have to surrender their decision making to these authorities. And so these decisions cannot and must not be questioned if the decision is coming from an authority. In other words, you are not able to make decisions for yourself when you're under an authoritarian ethical rulership. You are not allowed to make decisions for yourself because you can't, according to that kind of thinking. It's not possible. You don't have it in you. And so you need an authority that transcends you. It transcends who you are. And this is why people look to deities, because they tend to transcend humankind. They are in the ether. They're invisible. They're magical. And they're very dangerous. And if you do not listen, your life will be ruined. And this is how leaders in cults operate. They become an authority over your life. They tell you if you can go bowling. They tell you if you can drive out and go on a date or whatever. They tell you if you can visit your parents. They tell you all these different things. Think of, Scientology, for heaven's sake. These are authoritarian ethical frameworks. Scientology is a huge one. If you've ever listened to Leah Remini's series on Scientology, you need to listen to it. It just goes to show you how these people set themselves up in title positions and then hold authority over people, telling them how to live, where to put their money. Notice how they're getting wealthy and you're going broke. It's real important that you understand how this works in human beings. Mankind, or humankind, for all you people out there that are going to send me emails because I said man, humankind is designed by its own very nature to know itself, understand itself, and decide for itself. That's the way our brains are. And when we submit our decision-making and our ideas on our own levels of competence to incompetent leaders and people who, because they have title authority, set themselves up over us, and we submit to them out of fear and weakness, then your life isn't going to go well. And sometimes it does go well because you're submitted to some kind of an authority, simply because maybe you are out of control. Maybe you do have addictions. Maybe you can't get along with people well. Well, rather than, figure out what the problem is, it's easier to plug you into a system where somebody thinks for you or tells you how to think and you just submit to it. And that happens an awful lot in this world. My goal is to help you think for yourself. My goal is to help you understand yourself, live to yourself, make competent decisions, and not place yourself under the authority and rule of another human being. That is a big no-no. Okay, let's recap. Authoritarianism, based on its formality, has to do with a system that is based not on reason and knowledge, but on awe of the authority. In other words, not on what you know, what they know, what is reasonable and what isn't reasonable, whether it's coming from them or yourself. It's based upon sheer awe of the authority, okay? And that's what you need to understand about the formality of this. What about materially? Materially, authoritarian ethics answers the question of what is good based upon what is good for the authority and not on what is good for the submitter to that authority. That's another thing you need to understand. Authoritarian ethics bases its structured reasoning and authoritarianism on what is good for the authority itself, not what is good for you. Okay, this is going to be really important. Good and bad, when it comes to authoritarian ethics, are determined by the level of usefulness the subject has for the authoritarian leader. I want you to hear that again. In authoritarian ethics, good and bad are based on a level of usefulness, not in whether or not it is good in and of itself. So under this kind of thinking, a thing is called good if it is good for the person who uses it. Think about an employer and an employee. An employee is good if the employee is beneficial to the employer who hires him. So this is how these structures tend to play out. So it's not surprising that good and bad can be solely, based on a parent's expressions. If you're a child, if you're a really small child, expressions of approval and expressions of disapproval show up on the signpost of the human face. Us humans, like all animals, send off approach and avoid signals, and the place that happens is on the human face. So when a parent glares at a child, the child instinctively knows that whatever is happening, it's either good or bad based upon the facial expression. Before children are able to reason, there's a built-in sense of good and bad or right and wrong that's initiated by the authoritative parent. And that's just normal, okay? I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's what happens. So based upon, the type of parent, how authoritarian the parent is or how liberal the parent is, will determine a lot in a child's early formative years. I want you to think about independent, self-willed children for a minute. Independent, self-willed children think for themselves. They tend to be more aggressive. They tend to be more assertive, and they tend to be more individualistic. Now, this is a quality you can be born with, but oftentimes an authoritarian-driven parent will see that child as a bad child, because the child doesn't submit to the parent's will. The child is submitting to its own will, its own desires, its own genuine interests, and not the interest of the parent. Does that make the child bad? It does not make the child bad. It makes the child independent of the parent's will. Now, if the parent wants the child to do something that's in the child's interest, and the child's independent of that idea and doesn't want to do it, then yes, that can be a problem, absolutely. But if the child is independent of the parent and an individualistic brain type, and the child is low-regulated and unsystematic in its thinking, then the child will push back if it's not what the child wants to do. And what parents need to understand is, does this hurt the child, or does this just hurt my ego? Like, oftentimes parents correct children because the children embarrass the parent, not because the child actually did anything really wrong. And I could go back and forth on this all day and get hung up in here, and I don't want to get hung up in this pothole. But you have to understand that some parents who are strict authoritarian parent types, and they have an authoritarian ethic, they view submitted children as good children and independent children as bad children, without really being conscious of what they're doing. And oftentimes the submitted child is just scared of the parent and is afraid that, if they try to do what they want, there's going to be some sort of hell to pay. And that's a problem. I want to wrap this up, and I know I've been talking kind of fast, and I might need to slow down a little bit here as we wrap this up. But again, we're talking about authoritarian ethics and how authoritarian people types view the world and other people. So to sum this up, unless these authoritarian types or authority-driven ethics, wanted to, let's say, exploit the subject, it wouldn't need to rule by virtue of awe and emotional submissiveness or using fear as a motivator. We see this in the Old Testament of the Bible, where Yahweh, of the Jewish God of the Old Testament, everything's fear-driven. Smoke, fire, opening up the earth and swallowing people, submitting to this awe-oriented borderline monster in the ether causes everybody to submit to the authority. And so the laws are laid down, the rules are laid down. There's no encouragement or rational judgment or criticism of the law or the rule. So the lawgiver can't be found incompetent in any way. And so, I remember growing up, I would hear statements like, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. So there was no ability to question the rules, the authorities, the norms. You can't criticize it. You can't judge it. You can't weigh it. You can't do anything. It's like being handcuffed and placed into a straitjacket and thrown to the bottom of a swimming pool. There's nothing you can do. And so, and then the unforgivable sin of this in authoritarian ethics is rebellion. So if you remember the garden story, the garden myth in the Genesis account, you can eat of all the trees of the garden, but you can't eat of this tree. So knowing good and evil isn't a bad thing. It's considered virtuous right now in the world to have this kind of knowledge of what's good and what's not good. That's a virtuous thing. The problem was the disobedience. You didn't do what I said, therefore you must die. And so that's a real clear picture of an authoritarian ethic. I was raised in an authoritarian ethic. I got in trouble and punished when I was, 8 years old or so, because I was listening to Puff the Magic Dragon. So I grew up in a house like this. And so you got to start thinking, like, these people that are in government in a lot of these authoritative roles, they have this Old Testament thinking that you listen to us, we know what's best for you, just like Yahweh knows what's best for the Jews. And this is the kind of thinking that people are taking on. This is nothing new, folks. This isn't new at all. So when an authoritarian's interests are at stake, they ordain obedience to be the main virtue and disobedience to be the main sin. It's sort of like, go to your room. Why? Because I said so. There's no real answer. It's you listen to me, young man, or you listen to me, young lady, and you don't question my authority. And we see governors doing this. You do not question my authority. Humanitarian ethics allows us to question the authority. It allows us to question the law, to question the rules, to question these things. What if they're stupid, right? We have to be able to question them. And so there's nothing wrong with that. So challenging the authority becomes the ultimate rebellious act in authoritarian ethics. It's important to understand that. Okay, I keep trying to wrap this up and slow down, and I think I keep speeding up. What do I want to say? I want to say this. I think the pushback that America is getting right now from the progressives is in direct proportion to a over-authoritarian ethics model. To each his own is pretty much gone off the charts. But that's in direct proportion to how, people are responding to hundreds of years of authoritarianism from an ethical standpoint. And there's just a lot of pushback. And I think, sure, a lot of it is overboard. And a lot of it is proportional to people feeling like they're not able to be themselves. Now, if you think of government, how intrusive government can be in your life, it's authoritarian. Government is an authoritarian concept. You have to have government. I get that. But you don't have to have 100 million people in government. That's a problem, obviously. But what I see happening is this is to help you understand how people think and how the unconscious mind works. You've got progressives, being the main group of people that are suppressing free speech, which is crazy because free speech used to be more of a conservative mindset, freedom, autonomy, and these types of things. And so it's crazy. And what's happening is these groups, whether it be conservatism, whether it be libertarians, whether it be liberalism, or whether it be progressivism, they turn into religions simply because there isn't enough strength in the group, because most people are passive, to get them where they want to be. So what they end up doing is promoting authoritarian leaders within their movement, and then it just becomes the very thing they were trying to escape. So it's a vicious circle, because you can't change human behavior. It's the same all the time. And this is why humanistic ethics, or humanitarian ethics, in my opinion, is a better system to work through. It's anthropocentric. It's a big word. And it just means that humans are really at the center of all that's going on, and not something that we can't see, something we can't understand, something we can't touch, something we can't prove, or any of these types of notions. You know, people like to be submitted to something larger than themselves, so they create things that are much larger than themselves. The problem is all the people in charge start holding everybody to that positional ethic, and then they end up crushing everybody under rules of law. And so no matter where you go in the world, look at any country you want to, you can see what's happening. All the power people are at the top, and all the submissive people are at the bottom. And all the power people seek the government roles. They all seek Congress. They all seek the Senate. They all seek the presidency. They all seek these different roles where they can have power over, not power to. Whatever happened to power to the people? Well, it doesn't exist, folks, because as soon as people get into power, they want power over. It's almost impossible to stop. And so what we have to do is get into a position that our value judgments are based upon our good. What's good for us? What's good for the people? Right now in the country, it's not about what's good for the people. It's about what's good for the people in power. And that's what we're seeing. I don't know what kind of pushback this will result in over the next couple years, or where that's going to go. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be some settling, because we don't have Donald Trump acting like a 4-year-old anymore. We don't have all the mainstream media who virtually hated his guts complaining about him all the time. That'll be a little bit of a breath of fresh air for me. I'm tired of every time I turn on the news, within 10 seconds, I hear the word Trump. That's getting annoying. So I think in that respect, I'm going to find some personal relief. I'm sick of hearing about one man out of, 350 million every single day of my life. That's getting annoying. But what are you going to do if now the people you want to submit to are not calling the shots? What are you going to do? Well, listen to my last podcast. That'll give you some insight on what you can do about that. I think that's number 45. But what I want to encourage you in is, if you're a parent, if you're a teacher, if you're a manager, if you're a leader, make sure your goal isn't some hidden competing commitment to keep yourself in charge and not allow people to be the best version of themselves possible, as they're either working for you or you're raising them as children to shoot them like arrows out into the world and make a difference. That you're not trying to stamp them with your authority ethic and what you think is right and what you think is wrong and these types of things. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm an advocate for rebellious kids. I'm not. What I'm not an advocate for is squelching people's creativity, telling people how to think, telling your children how they should think. I came out of a movement movement with a badge of courage as a parent was my children think exactly like me. And I was a part of that for many years, and I'm sad that I participated in that kind of thinking, and I've reconciled that with my kids since then. But, you know, I was doing the best I could with what I had to work with. It's what I was raised in. Most people end up, you know, a product of the parents until they are either brave or bold enough to think differently. It's a lot of work. For me, it was something I really couldn't seem to help. It kind of came natural to me, and I fought it for many years. But anyway, I hope this conversation, it's been a monologue, obviously, about authoritarian ethics and humanitarian ethics has been, I don't know, helpful in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. Leave a comment or something. Send me a message. I don't know what you want to do. But if it's clearing some things up for you or helping you in your thinking, great. If not, well, it was a grand waste of time. So, anyway, this has been your lovely host, Steve Sisler, and this is my monologue on authoritarian ethics based upon the work of Erich Fromm. And I just hope it's been helpful for you and you got something out of it. Well, until next time, I hope to see you back here listening to me on Behavioral Insights.